2. During the night, he dreamed. He dreamed that he feared death. Now, a man may consider a fear of death to be a natural reaction without truly considering the indifferent finality of the scythe and the guttural terror it represents. Locrien could see a hospital ceiling in his mind's eye, the checkerboard beige of tiles dotted with light buttons and the back and forth of nurses bustling. They didn't care for his plight. To them, he was a commodity, an object of another day at work, little more than a task. He imagined that he was surrounded by loved ones, the children he had never had, the parents who had already shuffled off the mortal coil, the lover who had taken her own life, and none of them could do anything to prevent the fate that would soon reveal itself in its own time. They could simply watch as though behind glass. Locrien was to undergo heart surgery, or maybe brain, something serious and intricate, and he was overwhelmed with fear of the anesthesia. Would he awaken in recovery, as though no time had passed at all? Or would he close his eyes for the final time, oblivious to the notion he'd never wake again? That instinctual call to survive, so primal in its impact, drove his heart into a frenzy. He felt himself little more than a rat consumed by amygdalic darkness, a mote of carbon dust in the cosmic void. The sound of wind chimes echoed a sonorous bell call, crying out from just behind the veil, a veil that revealed itself to be the curtains of his father's living room. Locrien lay upon the sofa lounge, looking down at the valleys and peaks of the blankets contorting his body, at the full-length windows that lined the northern face of his old home, at the shadow of the figure that glided formless outside. The wind threw itself up the valley towards the house on the hill, carrying with it an impossible cold, the cold of death that hung in swathes about her form, and Locrien, paralysed in a half-sleeping stupor, saw his desire reborn as a terrible spectre that patiently tried each window for ingress. Her. The word caught in his chest in a stuttered exhale, a sickly little thing held against him like a wounded creature. The white hand presented a limply pointed finger that dragged along the panes, the languid scrape of her nail on the glass like a branch swaying in a storm. The night bleached black as her fingers traced in wonder, beckoning him to approach. "Come," she said. Her name bulged in his throat. Mechanically he rose and approached the window, where he felt himself locked in her tiger gaze. The frost crept about the window until those eyes were all that he could see, and he found himself outside his father's property, standing where she had just been. The wind had dropped to a hint at a distant storm silently flashing its lightning in an intermittent pulse. There was no sound, there was no colour, and the cold tightened its grip on him. Frost skulked into the soles of his feet that crunched through the grasses encircling the house. He wandered in a trance, a somnambulant night walker, intruding on the still scene. In the witching hour darkness, he might have been the only human being of heat for miles. His icy hallucination appeared before him whenever he looked, although for whatever reason he could have navigated the hillside blind at that point. When he stepped over hillock and burrow, he'd look up and see her further on up the incline, closer still to the rear of the property, where the tallest eucalypt trees reached blasphemously for the heavens. Impatiently he scrambled further up the hill, replacing one breath with another, one heartbeat for the next. Over and again he stumbled on tree roots and lichen-bitten boulders. There was a worn path that ran between the trees at the top of the hill, winding towards a barbed wire fence where Locrien could see the mercury eyes of the spectre staring back at him, feel the Jupiter lies of her deception. How could he know what was real anymore? She guarded something there, something stationed at the fence at the rear of the property. The approaching thunder finally bellowed in the distance.